if the situation becomes threatening enough, if the Iranians come to the conclusion that Hezbollah's survival is under threat, or Hamas, or others, that it would draw Iran into the conflict as well. And then you would have a much broader and much more dangerous regional conflict, a regional war, really, that would have consequences for Israel, would have consequences for the U.S. as well, because we undoubtedly would not be able to stand by.
The US has urged for restraint after the Israeli Defense Force say that they've conducted airstrikes against 7 Hezbollah targets in Lebanese territory. That in response to rocket fire in the Israeli-occupied Golan Heights yesterday morning. That rocket, now believed to have killed 13 people, mostly children, hit a football pitch. Hezbollah initially denied involvement, but US security said that they were Hezbollah rockets. We also know that Benjamin Netanyahu has gathered a meeting of his security cabinet tonight, and he says that Hezbollah, he says, will pay a heavy price, is the quote. I wanted to directly quote that for you. Benjamin Netanyahu saying that they will pay a heavy price. Let's speak to the former US ambassador to Israel, Gerald Feierstein. Gerald, good evening.
Good evening.
Let's start with where we are tonight. What do you expect to come next as Benjamin Netanyahu describes what happened today, those strikes today, as not the retaliation and that a heavier price will come?
Well, unfortunately, I think that what we're seeing is this steady escalation of tit for tat responses. So Hezbollah has been firing across the Green Line into Israel. The Israelis have responded, and each time you seem to see this kind of ratcheting up of the level of action. The Hezbollah rocket yesterday, which hit a Druze village, and I think that there is certainly speculation that although it's clear that it was a Hezbollah rocket, nevertheless, there is some reason to believe that it was not targeting that particular village, which is not Israeli citizens. It's actually Syrian citizens. So, but we're going to see what's happening, and as you said quite correctly, the U.S. is working around the clock really to try to get the two sides not to continue this escalation.
And Golan Heights is an interesting place, isn't it? Israeli occupied in the 1960s. There was some tussles over it in the 1970s. A truce and a ceasefire was reached of sorts between Syria and Israel over it. What is the significance of this bit of territory in this story?
Well, the Golan Heights, as the name suggests, actually are a dominant strategic position between Israel and Syria. And so whoever controls the heights really has a commanding view of territory into both countries, into Syria and into Israel. So it's quite strategic. There were negotiations during the Clinton administration between Israel and Syria trying to resolve that issue and return sovereignty over the heights to Syria. But those talks failed. And more recently, during the Trump administration, the Israelis announced that they were annexing the Golan Heights, making it their sovereign territory, which was recognized by the Trump administration, but not by the rest of the international community.
And as you say, strategically very important. And you also say that Hezbollah's rockets perhaps weren't bound for there necessarily. Do we know that for sure?
Well, the Hezbollah, of course, denied it. I don't think that we know for sure that the rocket was not intended for that particular target, but it would be a target that would be odd because it was not aimed at an Israeli settlement, not aimed at an Israeli inhabitation. It was instead a Druze village. The Druze have occupied that part of the Golan Heights for many, many hundreds of years. And so there would be no reason why Hezbollah would want to strike at that particular target.
Okay. Um, is there a diplomatic path, Gerald, through these tensions between Israel and Hezbollah? Or I suppose as these things ratchet up, is that becoming less likely?
Well, and this is the concern that we will reach a point somewhere in the near future where both parties have crossed red lines and diplomacy is no longer an option. But as you know, Amos Hochstein, who is the special envoy for the Biden administration, has been working almost since October 7th to try to keep the two sides apart, to calm tensions, as you said, to implement UN Security Council Resolution 1701, which calls for the withdrawal of Hezbollah forces north of the Litani River and keeps the Israeli forces out of the area so that you have a buffer and the opportunity for clashes becomes much less. So that's really what the administration has been trying to do, as well as working with the authorities in Beirut, as well as with the Netanyahu government, to try to convince them not to proceed further towards escalation.
What would a ceasefire in Gaza mean, do you think? Which seems quite far away, doesn't it, at the moment? But pressure is building for one. What would it mean for Israel's tussle with Hezbollah?
Well, I think that there's still, a general view that the key to calming the situation, not only between Hezbollah and Israel on Israel's northern border, but also in terms of Houthi attacks in the Red Sea, and now we see the Houthis even trying to attack Israel itself, plus the situation with pro-Iranian militias in Iraq and in Syria, that the key to calming those tensions is really the situation in Gaza. And a sustainable ceasefire would probably mean that those clashes would cease. We've seen the statements from Hezbollah. We've seen the statements from the other pro-Iranian groups that they will cease their activities once the Israeli military operations in Gaza end.
And we've heard from Iran this weekend as well. They, of course, back Hezbollah, warning of unforeseen consequences if, as Benjamin Netanyahu seems to hint at, there is a further retaliation from Israeli forces. What do you interpret that to mean?
Well, this is, of course, the great concern that the administration has had from the very beginning, and that is that if the situation becomes threatening enough, if the Iranians come to the conclusion that Hezbollah's survival is under threat, or Hamas, or others, that it would draw Iran into the conflict as well, and then you would have a much broader and much more dangerous regional conflict, a regional war, really, that would have consequences for Israel, would have consequences for the U.S. as well, because we undoubtedly would not be able to stand by. So this is again something that the administration has been working very hard to avoid, both publicly and privately, messaging both the Israelis and the Iranians not to take steps that would create this broader conflict. Our sense is that the Iranians don't want to see a war. They've got a lot of internal issues that they're dealing with right now, the formation of a new government after the Raisi death, and other things. And so nobody really wants to see the situation deteriorate like this. And yet there are concerns that as each side takes steps to retaliate against the other, that at some point you will cross a tripwire and end up where you don't want to be.
Okay, Gerald, really insightful. Thank you so much. Gerald Feierstein, who is former US ambassador to Israel, with us as those tensions build over the weekend between Hezbollah and Israel. We'll bring you any developments on Times Radio as we get them. Of course, Benjamin Netanyahu saying tonight that a heavy price will be paid by Hezbollah, so hinting at the retaliation earlier this morning not being the end of that particular story.